Mesdames et messieurs, merci de prendre place. Nous allons démarrer. Mesdames et messieurs, chers partenaires, chers amis, je tiens à vous saluer toutes et tous dans vos fonctions et responsabilités, et je souhaite en particulier rendre hommage à la qualité du panel d'intervenants que nous accueillons aujourd'hui à l'ESA, dans cette école qui accompagne et forme les leaders de demain et que j'ai le plaisir de diriger. Permettez-moi donc de remercier les organisateurs, la Lebanese Citizen Foundation et son président fondateur, cher Alain, qui a pensé et structuré cette conférence exceptionnelle, ainsi que la Fondation Konrad-Adenauer, partenaire privilégié de la Fondation. Merci également aux prestigieux invités qui interviendront aujourd'hui et qui représentent le Liban, la France, la Norvège, l'Union européenne, la Banque mondiale, la Banque européenne pour la reconstruction et le développement et bien sûr la Fondation libanaise. Mesdames et messieurs les ambassadeurs, mesdames et messieurs les ministres, les présidents, les directeurs, bienvenue. Je suis très heureux que nous soyons ce soir rassemblés à l'ESA pour traiter, pour approfondir un sujet brûlant d'actualité, celui de la révolution verte, de la transition énergétique et de l'intérêt pour le Liban de prendre ce virage en urgence. Au lendemain de la COP26 de Glasgow, une chose semble actée. Le mouvement mondial est enclenché, parfois avec réticence, parfois avec condescendance, avec retenue, mais la marche en avant sur le sujet est irréversible. Preuve en est, s'il le fallait, même les acteurs que l'on aurait pu penser les plus frileux s'engagent. Les acteurs de l'énergie, les gouvernements des pays du Golfe ou encore ces immenses fonds de pension si souvent critiqués. Je vous invite ainsi à lire les interventions de Larry Fink, président de BlackRock, ce gestionnaire d'actifs américain qui pèse près de 10 000 milliards de dollars, 300 fois celui du Liban. Dans ses lettres au PDG, Larry Fink donne le cap de l'investissement d'avenir, celui qui prend en compte la dimension ESG, Environment, Social Governance. Il enjoint par conséquent les dirigeants et les conseils d'administration à mettre la problématique du changement climatique au cœur de leurs préoccupations stratégiques. Non pas qu'il soit devenu philanthrope ou écologiste, mais simplement du fait que la multiplication des opportunités économiques crée et créera demain une transition énergétique juste et équitable. Et il y a une chose dont je suis convaincu à ce sujet, c'est que nous avons notre rôle à jouer, tous ensemble, chacun à notre échelle, dans nos rôles et fonctions. En tant que directeur général de l'ESA, je mesure le besoin que nous, grandes écoles de commerce, avons d'intégrer et de travailler pour intégrer mieux encore cette dimension dans nos programmes comme dans notre fonctionnement. J'avais d'ailleurs le plaisir de témoigner à ce sujet dimanche dernier à Dubaï en introduction d'une table ronde sur le développement durable sur le pavillon libanais de l'Expo 2020. Et je rappelais notre volonté, en tant qu'école de commerce, d'accompagner et de soutenir ce mouvement. Nous avons pleinement conscience de l'impatience de nos étudiants et de notre corps professoral de partager, d'approfondir et d'avancer sur ces questions. Certains de nos prestigieux partenaires ici à l'ESA, comme par exemple HEC Paris, nous ont montré la voie. Ils ont, il y a peu, nommé un conseiller spécial en charge du climat et de la durabilité environnementale et qui veille au développement de nouveaux contenus avec l'aide de la faculté. C'est un chemin qu'il nous faut suivre. Et si nous sommes rassemblés ici aujourd'hui, c'est que nous croyons que le Liban doit emprunter cette voie vers la transition écologique, énergétique, même si d'aucuns diront que ce n'est pas la priorité du moment. D'aucuns n'hésiteront pas à emprunter un ton parfois sarcastique en nous reprochant d'être déconnectés des réalités de la crise actuelle. Ils auront tort. Le rebond du pays du Cèdre, sa reprise économique, passeront aussi en empruntant cette voie. Engager le Liban dans une révolution écologique et énergétique, c'est considérer l'état de délabrement dans lequel se trouve le pays, en matière justement d'environnement, d'énergie, de santé publique. Engager le Liban dans une révolution écologique et énergétique, C'est générer à terme des économies de 5,8 milliards de dollars avec 50% d'énergie renouvelable. C'est créer près de 3000 emplois directs en passant à ces 50% d'énergie renouvelable. Engager le Liban dans une révolution écologique et énergétique, c'est enfin être à l'écoute et en appui des formidables initiatives qui foisonnent et qui méritent d'être soutenues et fédérées. Les chiffres que je viens de citer sont extraits du passionnant rapport d'Alex Ray pour le think tank Triangle, qui vient de sortir et que je vous invite d'ailleurs à lire sur le sujet. Le chemin vers la transition énergétique sera long et la pente sera raide, mais c'est bien le chemin à suivre. Il faudra innover, éduquer, sensibiliser, savoir être concret et pragmatique. Il faudra de l'audace, du courage, de la force de caractère, et je sais que vous n'en manquez pas. Alors, très bons échanges à tous. Merci pour votre présence et à tout à l'heure pour participer au débat de vive voix. Merci à vous.
Masa al-Khair. Je vais parler en français, parce que nous sommes à l'ESA. Mesdames et messieurs, la Fondation citoyenne libanaise a le très grand plaisir de vous accueillir aujourd'hui pour explorer des voies nouvelles concernant un sujet qui n'est pas nouveau, que nous connaissons malheureusement bien, à cause de son incidence négative sur la vie du citoyen, sur la compétitivité de l'économie, sur les coûts de l'entreprise, sur la détérioration écologique, sur une situation de caisse noire qu'il représente, parallèlement à une mauvaise gouvernance qui est très décriée, et sur le problème qu'il cause en termes de gestion des finances publiques et de politique de subvention. Je voudrais, avant toute chose, remercier nos partenaires ici présents et chez qui nous sommes présents, l'École supérieure des affaires et son directeur général, M. Maxence Dio, et la Fondation Konrad-Adenauer et son directeur général, le Dr Michael Bauer, nos amis et partenaires de Konrad-Adenauer et leur programme régional pour la sécurité énergétique sponsorisent généreusement cet événement, et l'ESA nous offre ce lieu magnifique pour son déroulement. Chers amis, la Fondation citoyenne libanaise est née de la nécessité de promouvoir la citoyenneté dans notre pays et dans un certain nombre de pays avoisinants. Elle s'y attelle déjà et elle a pour projet de proposer des choix et des options de politique publique dans un pays qui généralement passe outre l'essentiel et le bien-être du citoyen pour s'occuper de manière presque obsessionnelle de ce qui est bon ou mauvais pour les clans. Elle a également, donc la Fondation, pour mission de faciliter le processus de prise de décision en contribuant à organiser un débat public constructif à travers diverses méthodes. La Fondation citoyenne libanaise, qui a vu le jour le 26 mai 2021, lance ainsi son 5e événement. Le premier s'était intéressé à trouver un nouveau modèle de développement pour notre pays, en passant par son positionnement et par son programme de redressement et de réforme. Les suivants se sont focalisés sur les infrastructures, le volet social et le port de Beyrouth. Dans la foulée, donc, quoi de plus naturel que d'aborder le sujet de l'énergie, à un moment où notre société subit de plein fouet la situation catastrophique de ce secteur et où les services de base en pâtissent. Pendant longtemps, l'année scolaire et universitaire elle-même en était menacée. En plus de ces événements destinés à promouvoir les réformes et le changement, à créer le débat et à le faire avancer, la Fondation citoyenne se focalise sur les grandes thématiques de politique publique, sur lesquelles, souvent, des élites locales font l'impasse depuis plus d'un demi-siècle. Par exemple, il est surprenant et nocif que dans un pays comme le Liban, les élites au pouvoir s'embarrassent très peu de réfléchir et d'agir sur des thèmes comme la montée des inégalités, alors qu'elle est caricaturale dans notre pays, mais aussi sur les effets de la migration et ses mécanismes, un double choc récent, sachant que nous faisons face à cette problématique depuis des millénaires avec ce double choc, récent, donc le double choc. Pourquoi? Parce qu'il y a eu évidemment l'entrée massive des déplacés syriens et le départ de nos talents dû à la crise ravageuse. De même, le niveau de réflexion concernant le monde rural est affligeant et l'approche vis-à-vis du dossier des hydrocarbures est inquiétante. Fort à propos, la Fondation citoyenne vous donne rendez-vous avec une étude analytique relative aux hydrocarbures dans la zone offshore libanaise qui présentera un certain nombre d'options de politique publique vis-à-vis de ce sujet aux effets potentiellement majeurs et structurants dans un sens ou dans l'autre. Au lieu de spéculer sur l'existant et de faire des choix inadéquats, voire catastrophiques, nous proposerons des scénarios pour chaque éventualité. Mais ces scénarios eux-mêmes, dans le domaine des hydrocarbures donc, sont sensibles aux choix énergétiques du Liban, bien entendu, et c'est précisément de cela que nos prestigieux intervenants discuteront aujourd'hui, à un moment où, à l'international, des gens aussi éminents que Joe Stiglitz appellent à un Green New Deal. Alors, du vert ou pas beaucoup, ou pas trop, possible ou pas possible, au niveau national ou au niveau local, qu'en pensent les bailleurs de fonds, les municipalités, les experts? Nous allons ce soir ouvrir des perspectives de manière scientifique et claire, dans un débat qui, je l'espère, permettra à chacun de faire évoluer sa position vers du bon et du réalisable. Je note au passage que la Fondation citoyenne a pris parti depuis un bon moment pour l'utilisation d'une petite part de l'argent perçu des droits de tirage du FMI pour doter les écoles et universités libanaises d'énergie solaire, ce que l'un de nos intervenants va nous expliquer. Et je vous invite à consulter notre note sur le site de la Fondation, donc le www.thecitizenfoundation.com. Dans un premier temps, donc, nous écouterons des experts traiter un sujet dans lequel ils se sont très fortement investis. Ensuite, nous partagerons avec 3 présidents de conseils municipaux leurs expériences avec l'énergie en temps de crise. Et enfin, nous conclurons avec une très belle table ronde avec Son Excellence l'ambassadeur de Norvège, Martin Ittervik, qui nous fait l'honneur de sa présence, ainsi qu'avec M. François de Ricolfi, chef du service économique régional de la France, Madame Alessia Squarcella, excusez-moi si je ne prononce pas tout à fait comme il faut, qui est le Deputy Head of Cooperation à la délégation de l'Union européenne, M. Khalil Dingizli, qui est le directeur du bureau de la BERD, et M. Alexis Madelin, représentant la Banque mondiale. Je les remercie très chaleureusement de leur présence. Le but avoué de cette soirée est de tenter de faire converger autant que possible les points de vue afin de ne plus se perdre en projets concurrents, au moins sur l'essentiel. Je vous souhaite à tous un débat sain et constructif dans le respect des avis des uns et des autres. J'aurai le plaisir, mais aussi la tâche ardue, de modérer les échanges et le mauvais rôle de vous interrompre si vous dépassez vos temps de parole ou si, à Dieu ne plaise, le ton va au-delà de la passion légitime. Merci à vous tous d'être venus, malgré les temps difficiles, malgré la recrudescence du Covid. Vous voyez que les normes sanitaires sont à peu près respectées. Et bonne soirée fructueuse. Je laisse donc la parole à Dr. Michael Bauer.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, excellencies, dear partners, distinguished speakers, dear guests, dear colleagues, dear friends of Konrad-Adenauer Foundation. It is my great pleasure to join my partners from the Lebanese Citizen Foundation and the École Supérieure des Affaires and welcome you to today's event on the prospects and challenges of a green energy revolution here in Lebanon. It is Konrad-Adenauer Foundation's mission and vision as an independent, non-profit German political foundation with roughly 120 offices around the world to further international dialogue and debate in all its facets on a broad variety of topics. And so it is my particular pleasure today to welcome you here, not only as the director of the Lebanon office of Konrad-Adenauer Foundation, but to welcome you also on behalf of the Konrad-Adenauer Foundation regional program on energy security and climate change in the Middle East and North Africa, which is based in Morocco and is actually, as Alain already pointed out, supporting this event as well. One of the main objectives that Konrad-Adenauer Foundation works on, together with its partners from politics, from civil society, from the private sector, from the academia, is to further good governance, sustainable economic and social development, and to strengthen and support innovation worldwide. From my point of view, the topic of today's event is of particular relevance, therefore, for our work. It is also of particular relevance for us as a Lebanon office, of course, because it is so important for Lebanon. Lebanon, the Lebanese economy are going through very difficult times, and I think this might be even an understatement, if you allow me, and face unprecedented and very complex crisis. The shortage of energy is a particularly salient aspect of this crisis, with far-reaching effects, as the previous speakers have already pointed out. The dependable and economically as well as ecologically sustainable supply of energy and electricity is essential for modern societies. It's essential for a modern society economy, for private households, for the public sector, education institutions such as universities, schools, public administration, hospitals, and so on and so forth. Creating appropriate infrastructures and a sustainable legal and economic framework, therefore, is a central political task. And progress toward improving the energy supply would also be an important step, and it would at least give some hope in the face of the ongoing crisis here. And so I'm indeed very pleased and very grateful that it was possible to gather a number of renowned experts on the subject here today to share with us their views and their ideas and their recommendations on how and on what steps can be taken out of the energy crisis. And it's not just about that. It's not just about improving the supply of energy and electricity, but it's about building back better. And the aim should be to aim for a supply of energy that makes use of the huge potential a country like Lebanon holds when it comes to the use of renewable energy sources. I will stop here. Thank you for your interest in the event, and wish you and wish all of us now a very productive and very fruitful discussion. Thank you very much.
Je peux appeler M. Rajer, M. Saddi et M. Madeleine va nous rejoindre sur écran. Enfin. Donc nous allons maintenant ouvrir le premier panel au cours duquel M. Roni Karam fera la présentation du projet LFRI. Il sera ensuite suivi d'interventions de notre ancien ministre de l'Énergie et de l'Eau, M. Raymond Rajer, de M. Joe Saddi, ici présent, et de M. Alexis Madeleine. Et le temps de parole sera de 30 minutes, et pour chaque intervenant, 8 à 9 minutes, si possible. À toi, Roni.
Well, thank you, Alain. Thank you, everybody. I'm Roni Karam, and I'm the president of the Lebanese Foundation for Renewable Energy. We're an NGO working benevolently, many experts in all the fields linked to renewable energy and financing and legal. And we're self-financed, which means that we're independent and we're very passionate about working on the subject. We obviously, all of us think today this is a major subject in Lebanon today. As my colleagues mentioned, Lebanon is going through a very difficult period. These are not normal times for our country. and the energy sector is not a normal sector. And obviously, we are today in a failed system. The country doesn't have electricity, or barely 2 or 3 hours a day, and we all know the cost that has hindered, the cost on the Lebanese economy, on the Lebanese population. It's a socio-economic impact. Obviously, the country is addicted to fossil fuels. $6 billion, more than $6 billion in 2019 of imports. Almost half of it for transportation, the other half for producing electricity. This is something we cannot afford anymore. The country doesn't have the foreign exchange outflow that we used to have in the past. And we've seen the saga where the Minister of Energy has to beg for $100 or $200 million every single time from the BDL in order for us to be able to have some energy, and waiting for the boats to come, constantly waiting for the boats to come. Obviously, we have also lethal energy production. The pollution, the amount of pollution is extremely high. Last week, there was an article in L'Orient Le Jour about the generators' impact on public health, and the medium and long-term impact that we will have, both from diesel plants, from HFO, heavy fuel oil, and from the generators. A study last year by Greenpeace evaluated, put Lebanon tragically on the highest, worst level in the MENA region for diseases and death rate linked to energy, fossil energy production. So we have a very lethal component here that's impacting the country. We haven't heard many ministers of energy talk about this issue. So this is the time to think out of the box. This is the time to be imaginative. This is the time to dare, and this is the time to move to a new model. And when we talk about leapfrogging, we're very late in renewable energy compared to the rest of the world, or to the neighboring countries. Jordan, for example, has today 1,400 megawatts of renewable. Lebanon barely has 100, after the surge we've had recently because of the power cuts. So 14 times more than we do. So we can leapfrog and move to be in front of the line. And this is the time to be able to do that. We need key principles. We need to be able to move now on key principles. One is sustainability, obviously. We cannot keep on being liable to importing our energy. We import 97% of our energy. Apart from the few dams we have, all our energy are imported, mainly through fossil fuel. Speed, we need to move fast. So we need to get the low-hanging fruits that are available for us. Savings, least cost. We have to go to the least cost. We're a bankrupt country, and the country cannot waste any more money in any plan that is not sustainable and that will provide us a least cost energy mix. And obviously, energy security, as we said. Even today, the plans that are being contemplated, and we know this is necessary, but we're getting our gas from Egypt and some electricity from Jordan through Syria. And we know today, tomorrow, what Syria can do to us in terms of leveraging how we buy our energy, and that goes through Syria. So this is extremely important. So just roughly, we need to move from the obsolete, rigid, and failed system that we have today, which is the power industry as we know all of it, okay? Where you have big plants that produce energy that send it to consumers. And obviously we have a transmission, the network that allows us to do that. And what we have today is 40% loss, when we're moving this energy from the producer to the consumer. And we need to move to a new energy model where the world is going, okay? Where all of us can produce our own energy. So we're consumers and producers at the same time. On a small scale, we can put it on the rooftop of our house, of our building. On a medium scale, with municipalities, for example, or on a large scale, obviously very large solar plants and wind plants that can come and cater for the energy needs of the country. And we need to integrate this with storage and with new sources of energy, which are obviously renewable energy, which are the cheapest and the most sustainable. the network has become more intelligent. We have to move today to a two-way network where you can take electricity but also sell back electricity. You have to introduce big data and blockchain and artificial intelligence into the network to analyze your demand and to be able to manage all of this demand. You have to introduce storage, obviously, that allows you today to store huge amounts of energy. And Lebanon has potential for pumped hydro storage. Batteries have become much cheaper now than they were a year ago or 2 years ago. And introducing, smart, in order for us to move into a smart network, to a smart grid. So this is extremely important today to dare move to that model and to dare move as soon as possible in different steps. We know this is not going to happen over time, but we have to look at it in a holistic way. We cannot separate anymore. I mean, what we have today in terms of energy plans, what they call energy plans, are projects. Each lord wants his own plant on the coast. Okay, so this is what they go and ask for financing, for example. And we've seen the sagas in the past about these different projects. We have to look now at the vision, at the plan, and look at it holistically. For example, we mentioned distributed generation all over the country in different scales. We cannot separate smart charging, electrical cars anymore. Electrical cars today, and we know this is not for tomorrow in Lebanon, but this is something that we need to start planning for the next 5 to 10 years. Because electrical cars are a huge challenge on the grid. You need a lot of energy to be able to fill an electrical car. It spends a lot of energy, but it's a huge opportunity at the same time because you can leverage the battery in the electrical cars. And obviously demand response, be able to match, for example, your demand with the low energy production that you have. And this requires obviously smart meters and switches and this big analysis that we can do. So this is a holistic approach that requires this vision and the commitment to be able to move to that energy model. Okay? So it's a game changer. Obviously, we're talking about something that people managing that sector today might consider to be a dream, but it's not. This is something that's reality. The impact is going to be huge on the country, provided we build, as much renewable energy as possible. And there's a study that was done by EDF for the World Bank, the least cost study that was fought by the ministry. Okay. When we move to that level where they recommended, at least in their first version, 37% renewable energy by 2025, okay, we will be able to close most of the factories on the coast. And we will clean our coast. And we will have 2 large plants only as baseload on the coast, which will be Deir Ammar and Zahrani. Lebanon's geography forces us to build plants only on the coast for fuel supply, for turbine cooling, and this is where most of the population lives. So this is a very lethal combination between the population centers and where we produce our energy. So we have, by cleaning up our coast, we can think about quality of life again, we can think about tourism again. Okay? But it's really important to really ramp up this renewable energy and this revolution that we're talking about, and that will allow us to close most of the factories on the coast. Okay. We understand there are some technical issues about peaker plants and the whole thing. We're not going into that. But major cleaning up of all the coast, closing Zoo and GE definitely. These are environmental catastrophes, public health catastrophes, and they have to go as soon as possible. Plenty of space. Initially when we asked, why don't we do more renewable, they told us, this is a small country and there's not enough land. Well, with CNRS, we've been mapping for the past 2 to 3 years, all of Lebanon. We mapped 800 different sites in all areas of Lebanon. And we find 5 to 6 times as much space as we need for wind and solar to reach 50% renewable energy. And a lot of it is on public land. So plenty of public land. Here again, the approach that the authorities have taken to tender out renewable energy projects is they tell the developer, go find the land. And this is very costly. This is not best practice. And it takes much more time. And this is, and the price comes at much higher than what it should be. For example, the Hawa Akkar project, it's been 10 years in the works. Some of it, might have been because of political issues, but 10 years. And the price came at double what we think it should come. And part of the main reason is because they tell the developer, go find the land. Why? Land is plenty, it's available, it's public, and it can be studied and licensed in advance. So it's really important to understand that the land is not only finding the land, but it's preparing it in advance to be connected to the grid, and to be within a holistic study and approach in terms of where we start the different projects and in what regions we can leverage the land that is available. Okay. Another game changer, the cost. Last year or 2 years ago, gas was at 7-8 cents. Hybrid models were at 20 cents. Today, gas has gone up. You have a hike in oil prices worldwide, and gas is around 10 cents. Okay, up and down. Hybrids, with the halving of the battery prices in the past 2 years, has also reached 10 cents. And this is a game changer for the whole country, because it allows us more and more to promote the distributed energy that we're talking about. And we will have, obviously, the mayors here who do talk about these projects that can be done in a regional or in a village level, which are extremely important. Obviously, we all know that today solar is at 3-4 cents. Jordan, 2.5 cents. Saudi Arabia, 1.5 cents. Obviously, we don't have the cost of financing that they have, but 3-4 cents for pure large-scale solar systems is something that Lebanon can achieve. Again, reducing substantially our cost. So how do we do that? And one of the reasons we are told we cannot do renewable is the grid. The whole paradigm about the grid is too weak, it's unstable. You put solar and wind and it creates more instability on the grid. We don't buy that. You can start with the low-hanging fruits. Low-hanging fruits is self-consumption, which means that we can put rooftops on every single school and university and hospital, and we'll discuss that. You can start with the villages. It doesn't need the grid. Very limited amount of grid. Okay, even some utility scale. We identified a site that can 300 megawatts in Ras Al-Albak on public land that can use the existing grid, and this is what we're going to talk about. While we obviously invest into the grid. But we don't need to wait until we upgrade the grid to start with major ramp up in renewable energy. And concretely, what we recommend is 2,000 megawatts of renewable energy, 300 existing with a pump hydro, with the hydro dams. So 1,700 megawatts of different projects of renewable energy. Base load is being worked by the World Banks. On Deir Ammar, 450 megawatts gas from Egypt, 250 megawatts from Jordan. But this is what we recommend that we can start very quickly and implement within 24 months. Okay? A little detailed. 600 megawatts, for example, for rooftops. We have studied all the schools in Lebanon, 2,800 schools. We've studied all the hospitals in Lebanon, 50 megawatts potentially on the rooftop of all the hospitals. We've studied all the public buildings in Lebanon, 200 to 250 megawatts. We've studied all the public wells in Lebanon, 180 megawatts. All of these projects could be implemented very quickly without requiring or very little requirement regarding the upgrade of the grid. So this is extremely important. And as I mentioned, double the existing RFPs. Hybrid municipality would be large, and starting with a 300 megawatt utility scale based on the existing grid constraints. The consequence of this is 2,000 megawatts would give us 20% of our energy that we need today. We estimate, maybe Lebanon used to be at 24 terawatt energy. The demand probably went down 20%, maybe more. We don't really know. But based on 20 terawatt energy, 4 terawatt energy by these 2,000 megawatts would give us 20% of our demand for 60% cheaper energy. So this is the low-hanging fruit that we're recommending to move as soon as possible. And this is where we believe international institutions have to put their money, because this is a very high return on investment. The estimate is that the $1.5 billion green budget that we would put in, there's a payback of less than 2 years. So for infrastructure, this is incredible. And we know this is coming, obviously, from the high cost of energy that we have today, especially from diesel generators. Okay? So quickly, the projects. This is Ras Al-Bak. This is public land. As you see, we only use land that is, not farmland. The farmland on the right, we don't use it. This is, we can start with 300 megawatts. This is the type of land that we have. If you look at the electrical poles in the background, this is a 220 kV line. So the linkage to the transmission network will be very easy. 300 megawatts, we're working now with 30 municipalities in the region to integrate within that a regional project, a hybrid regional project with battery systems that will feed for all these villages with renewable energy. One of the villages, the mayor is here. He's going to talk about his experience with a hybrid system that they have installed a couple of years ago. But our studies, we eliminate all the farmland, we eliminate all the wooded land, and this is what we're interested in. So this is the type of land, and this is the 32,000 megawatt potential land that we found. Nothing is agricultural, and nothing is wooded. So this is extremely important. As I mentioned, we mapped all schools in Lebanon, the 450 megawatts, hospitals, public wells, public buildings. We're going to map soon all the factories and industrial buildings and commercial buildings that will allow us to substantially ramp up renewable for self-consumption initially, and potentially that could throw back into the grid any excess electricity that is available. We're working, for example, with the IFC on the schools. So there's potential financing here that could come rather quickly. Okay. What is a hybrid system? As we mentioned, just simply we have the generator today, you add on it solar, and you add on it batteries. Okay, and it becomes a hybrid system. And we're able to reduce the cost to 10 cents instead of the 30 cents today that a diesel generator costs. Okay. This is the example of Jabouli. The mayor of Jabouli is going to be able to talk about this. It's covering more or less 2 villages. Instead of having 21 hours of generator functioning now, because there's only 3 hours of electricity, they only have the generator functioning 3 hours. We've done simulations on different villages, and the engineers are here, where they bring actually the use of the generator to less than 10%. So the whole modelization of the system and the sizing of the batteries is to allow you to use the generator as little as possible. And Jabouli is a good example of this. The payment by citizens, nobody used to pay for electricity. Now they pay all of it because it's prepaid cards. So the model is very simple. It's managed by private sector in coordination with the municipality. And the mayor of Jabouli was telling us a little earlier that I have industries that are interested to come to Jabouli now because there's electricity. So this is where it creates the virtuous cycle that would allow us to create more local industries, create local jobs, and develop our rural regions. So we talked about the short term, 2,000 megawatts that could be implemented in 24 months, so as very quickly, in parallel with the gas that is being done by the World Bank, and maybe in parallel with an additional 1 single plant of gas, increasing the capacity of Deir Ammar. And now this is the long term. Our goal, 30% by 2025. As I mentioned, the EDF study, at least the first draft that was released, provided 37% of renewables. And we understand the other draft is very close to that, or a little less. 50% by 2030. The savings, I think they mentioned the number by triangle. We did a study with AUB and Strategy N 2 years ago, and the savings would be much more substantial. The least cost generation mix obviously would divide our energy bill by 3 again, and this would, save us $36 billion according to our studies. So much more than what is anticipated. We're not talking about also the growth that obviously having electricity and cheap and sustainable electricity can bring to the country. Okay? Now, just to address the base load issue. We're told all the time that we need the base load first and then we put renewables. Things have moved in the past years that allow you to go beyond that. One, you can compress the base load, and this is extremely important in a country that is in dire need of cash. So we can compress the base load, and evaluating the base load is extremely important. The second argument is that there is dispatchable. So there's, they say the renewable energy, you don't control it. There's sun, there's no sun, there's wind, there's no wind. But today with the hybrids, this is something that you can control 24 hours a day. Our hydro dams, we don't need to use the hydro dams during the day. We can use them during the night. So when there's no sun, we use our water. So you can regulate your system, and this is when we're talking about an intelligent system. Same thing for imports. Why should we be importing from Jordan during the day? We should be importing from Jordan during the night when maybe we don't have enough production. So we need to be smart about our imports and our system. And obviously, as I mentioned, electrical vehicles, concentrated solar power, there's one project in Hermil, being studied for CSP. And utility scale batteries, this is something to mention. A year ago, 2 years ago, nobody was talking about very, very large scale batteries because it was too expensive. Today, every single utility in the world is deploying utility scale batteries because the prices have dwindled tremendously. And they're following the same path as solar and as wind. So this is where we expect that the 10 cents is going to go to 9 cents, 8 cents. As I mentioned, we did simulations where we're reaching 8 cents and a half. Obviously, it depends on the assumptions that we use. But the cost of batteries is going down so fast that we can expect batteries and the hybrid system to be even more competitive than they have become today. Last thing about smart demand management, obviously investing into smart meters, into smart switches, and investing in all this new technology that will allow us to understand much better our consumption, our patterns of consumption, so that demand can be catered to low supply of energy. So all of this is to get to in saying that things have moved so fast, technology is moving so fast. If we don't follow technology every single month, then we realize that a year or 2 years later, we're lost. So things are moving so fast that we have to review this syndrome about the base load, that we need base load first and we needed 3,000 megawatts initially in gas and the whole thing. We don't buy that. This is not true. Okay? A more detailed technical analysis has to be done on the base load issue, and we know that it can be compressed and it has to be done in parallel with renewables. And base load only comes when renewables cannot fulfill the demand, not the other way around. Quickly about governance. Governance is important. We're not mentioning it. I think it would be discussed later on. But obviously, all this more complex system, the different sources of producing energy needs governance. We need an independent regulatory authority. But this needs to be done in parallel with ramping up our infrastructure. We don't have the time. We don't have the luxury to wait 1, 2, 3 years to set up an era. We need to do it in parallel while we're moving fast into ramping up our energy production. Financing, I think, 2 more slides, Alain. Financing is a very important thing. They say renewables is 3 times, is more expensive initially than gas. This is true. But you don't look at it this way. One, financing is much easier for renewables, and I think international institutions and donors will be able to explain how they look at financing today for, on fossil fuel versus renewables. But, what's really important to understand is that once you install, you pay for a solar plant and you have to pay for 20 years the debt that you accumulated, this cost is fixed. It doesn't change. While with gas, you need to pay and to buy your gas, and it changes over the time. And we've seen now with the cost of oil going up the roof, that it can create huge deficits in countries like Lebanon if we don't address this, again, this sustainability and this energy security issue. Okay. Reduce health bill, $120 million a year, as per the strategy and AUB and LFRE study. Okay. And the result of this, we did a simulation for 10 terawatt-hour energy. This represents more or less today 40 to 50% of our consumption. Renewables, well, you only have to pay for your debt. So you get a financing from the World Bank or from EBRD, and you have to pay over 20 years for the debt. And the debt will be mainly $260 million out of the 290 will be paying the debt. $30 million is only operation and maintenance. For a gas plant, it's not enough to build the gas plant. It represents only 4 to 5% of the cost of producing energy over the lifetime of the gas plant. What we need is to be able to buy the gas. And we see today we have plants, but we don't have gas. We don't have money to do the maintenance of our plants. So this is extremely important to understand that we're paying $230 million for renewable, but only $30 million for operation and maintenance. For gas, you're paying $90 million. This is in our simulation. But you have to pay $120 million for operation and maintenance. And you have to pay $600 to $900 million in fuel, in the price of gas. So this takes us from 290 to 700 to $1 billion every single year. So it's a huge difference. And this is where the $36 billion come from, part of it. Okay. Why is it between 700 and 1,000? Because we're taking gas price assumptions between $3 MMBTU and $7 MMBTU. Today it's at $4.3 MMBTU. So you would be around $800, $150 million today. So it's really important to understand that the cost of financing is not the initial cost, it's how you finance it over 20 years and how you pay your annuities. Finally, the obstacles, elephant in the room. We told you we're independent, so we're going to put the finger where it hurts. Energy plans in Lebanon. We don't have energy plans, we have political plans. Okay? Any minister is nominated, we know who makes the decisions and what they're supposed to do. So we have to get politics out of energy plans. If we don't get politics, we'll be in the same paradigm that we've been in the past 10, 20 years in Lebanon today. Crisis management. We've always been in crisis management for the past 30 years. Crisis management, emergency, temporary. We need to bring the barges for only 2 years, and they stay for 10 years, and it costs us 3 times as much. So billions of dollars wasted, which ended up being taken from people's pockets in the banks. This is exactly the catastrophe and the failed system that we have today. Anti-corruption. Finally, and I'm almost done. This is one of the most corrupt institutions in the world. Anything you look, and we've seen all these different scandals, fuel, diesel, generators, barges, everything is mafia. Everything is corruption. One of the foreign participants in one of the bids told me, c'est du plancton, c'est du ministre au plancton, la corruption. Okay? So we have to keep in mind that we cannot rebuild our energy sector if we have mafias managing this energy sector. And this is extremely important. The 3 other things, I think I mentioned them a little. And I'm going to jump over that. So basically, in summary, green wins. We think we need to green as much and as fully and as fast as possible. This is a study, the strategy and study. 5 criteria, from cost to socioeconomic impact to pollution to energy security. Green wins everywhere. Well, thank you.
Thank you very much, Tony. Donc, la première des choses, c'est que tu as presque tenu ton temps. Ça va. La deuxième, c'est que c'est très beau d'avoir un projet bien packagé. La troisième, c'est qu'il y a énormément de travail, clairement, derrière tout ça. Maintenant, la quatrième, il faut que tu nous montres aussi. La quatrième de tes forces, c'est d'entendre les avis différents qui se profilent. Donc maintenant que nous avons écouté Ronnie en détail, je pense que le ministre Hajar va nous faire ses commentaires et nous parler donc pendant, je suis désolé, mais vraiment 8 minutes si possible. Merci.
Thank you, Alain. I'm glad I could speak in English. I was worried I was going to have to speak in French and you wouldn't understand a damn thing. Anyway, I could understand it, but I couldn't speak it. I guess what I'm going to say is a little bit, I feel like academic, technically academic. You know, traditional vertical integrated utility, generation, transmission, distribution, have been gradually replaced over the past 2 or 3 decades by generation, distribution, and transmission companies whose goals is to provide reliable electric service that is both adequate and secure. This task has become a lot more difficult. Why? The usual 20% operating reserve and the rule of thumb of larger single contingencies are no longer fully applicable to a new utility structure because there's not one person, not one company that is solely responsible for this. Power flow, power control is no longer the sole responsibility of a single entity. Both operators and consumers are now contributors to this control and to this power flow. Ensuring quality and security of electric service now depends on a multitude of factors that are controlled by various players with different interests. Utilities and operators are grappling with a new concept of generation mix and diversity of supply that are based on short-term available resources and consumer actions. With smart grids and community grids, now the consumers play a major role in this. The financial feasibility of energy project has become more entangled with the requirements and constraints of multiple stakeholders. So instead of just minimizing the levelized cost, that used to be the only criteria back in the 60s and 70s, now we have multiple criteria, and some of them conflict, unfortunately. So how does renewable energy figure into this? First of all, there's no question, renewable energy is here to stay. It's going to play a much more significant role in the energy balance in every system, including ours in Lebanon. We cannot forget, but we can't really overstress, because people sometimes play it negatively, that the intermittent nature of renewable energy makes its implementation fraught with challenges. However, new advent in technology, especially storage technology, that's becoming very, very cheap, and the massive reduction in prices of these technology will keep it at the top of the list of energy options for the future. So if you're doing least cost generation planning, we don't write words when we talk about least cost generation planning. We have to see plans, we have to see technical work, including those done by EDF. And these always put renewable energy at the top of the list, not as peaking, they are now becoming entrenched in the base load, like my colleague has just said. So the most obvious questions for us on your mind, how much renewable energy can you install in a system, any system? What makes renewable energy projects feasible? Why don't we have any significant or any grid-connected renewable energy projects in Lebanon? I'm talking about grid-connected, okay? The first question, how much renewable energy can you install? This is probably the most difficult and confusing question, because the penetration of renewable energy can go anywhere from 0% to 100%, and sometimes even greater than 100% if you are able to sell the excess power that you have. Nonetheless, the share of renewable energy must take into account the following constraint And these are very technical constraints, and if they are not taken into consideration, we will never see any development of renewable energy. First of all, the system has to be able to respond to the intermittent nature or to the intermittency of renewable energy using either fast action generation like hydro, synchronous ties with neighboring systems, and we have none, and we shall never have any. We cannot have synchronous ties with neighboring systems. We will have asynchronous ties. And of course, the best solution for us is low-cost storage. And this is going to be, the workhorse for us because it's becoming cheap, it's very reliable, and hopefully it will be, fast enough for our needs. The latest EDF study has put this capacity for taking, the largest contingency that can be taken by storage capacity at a maximum of 320 megawatt at peak. So if you put more than that and you lose it at peak time, you will have a complete blackout. This is EDF study. The impact on thermal, steady state, and dynamic stability of the system, these are technical, but these are necessary. If we don't observe these, we observe these in Jordan. I was one of the first people who built the system of renewable energy in Jordan. And these were very, very present. So we have to make sure that we adhere to steady state and dynamic stability. The impact on the adequate and secure performance of the grid, like harmonics, voltage collapse, power flow and transient stability, and subsynchronous resonance. Other constraints as well. Like any privately funded project, the feasibility of the project should depend on the amount of renewable energy and the locale. Fortunately, in Lebanon, especially in the Bekaa, we have plenty of solar irradiation. We have a lot of public land. That makes the resource available and cheap. That doesn't talk about the project, it talks about the resource. We need administrative, legal, environmental frameworks to be available for transparency purposes to attract investors. We're talking about making things available for many investors to come. That competitiveness will bring the cost down. The availability of capital, and we see that this has been a problem in the past for us. The feed-in tariff and the payment mechanism. And for the Lebanese government, this is the worst problem because our feed-in tariff is extremely low based on our current electricity tariff, and our payment mechanism on foreign currency is even worse because we cannot convert for exportable dollars. So that's what's making projects a little bit slow. Hopefully, when we have a financial plan with the IMF or with any other institution, that part of the difficulty will actually be eased off. Also, what type of agreements are you going to have? What type of PPAs? Power purchase agreement, grid connection agreements. These are the agreements that an investor takes to the bank in order to sell it to the bank so that he can get financing. Not any PPA is bankable. The PPA has to be bankable. The GCA has to be bankable. Otherwise, project looks good on paper. Now comes the most significant question to answer about the renewable energy in Lebanon. Actually, there are several hurdles to full-scale implementation or rollout, but again, we can work on each of them individually. The lack of financial feasibility for the government of Lebanon, I mentioned the feed-in tariff is too low compared to the tariff required, the break-in tariff or the levelized cost of, say, solar. The devaluation of the Lebanese pound makes the tariff even lower because we have to multiply it by an ever-changing exchange rate, yet we have to pay in foreign currency to pay off for the capital invested. The payment guarantees that are needed by the government to make the PPA bankable are not possible. When you are in default, you cannot give a guarantee to any private entity. Therefore, you have to work on some de-risking, okay? And the EBRD has worked on some de-risking proposal like ring fencing, but even that they found that when you ring fence the funds and the entire funds will not be enough to pay for one project, how do you run the utility? And what happens if the exchange rate, for example, is halved within, say, 6 months or something. So the entire amount of money that you collect will not be enough to pay. But again, a financial plan will make these, quite reasonable at some point. The lack of a standard legal framework and requirements to reduce the country risk for investors is needed. A unified administrative framework that delineates the responsibility for different stakeholders is missing. And a body that is who's the full custodian of all this work, starting with clear answers for the W5, I call it. Why is it needed? What's needed? Where is it needed? When is it needed? And who can do it? And who should follow up? All these have to be answered in order for a project to be successful. Having any sort of, inconsistency in answering these questions will make life difficult for the investors. And we all know that investors are scared when it comes to investing in any country, especially in a country like ours nowadays. So when people talk about renewable energy in Lebanon and how much can and should be installed, we hear numbers. I'm sure you all hear numbers, 20%, 30%, 50%, 4,000 megawatts, 2,000 megawatt. What do they mean? Who says? Based on what? Okay? The list goes on. It's a wish list depending on who's talking. If I'm talking, it's my wish list. If someone else is talking, it's his or her wish list. Okay? Some of them are based on technical studies, financial, interest studies, I don't know. But why aren't we seeing any projects? If they're so good, I don't believe a project that makes that much sense. We keep talking about it for 20 years. I've been hearing about this for 10 years at least, and nothing ever gets developed. Why is that? Don't you think there is something that doesn't really jive? If it makes sense, it will be implemented. So unless a proper framework is set that allows developers to compete on equal footing and reduces the country risk for payments and currency exchange, I think the development of RE will be fraught with many challenges. This is most unfortunate for a country like ours, where renewable energy constitutes the most feasible solution. I believe it is the most feasible solution when compared with private diesel generator, but it's still way too expensive when compared to electricity grid. When we compare how much is the break-even cost for a solar plant or a wind plant, and you compare it to the tariff we're paying for EDL, it's still at least 10 times more expensive. Therefore, we have to adjust the tariff of EDL in order to make it competitive. That is why we are seeing a surge of PV development in private home installations, because they are replacing electricity from diesel generator, whereas all grid-connected projects, including the 3-wind project in Akkar, have been halted and postponed, pending some advancement in securing funding, payment guarantees, and stability in the exchange rate. Thank you.
It's back. Thank you very much. Joe, please, the floor is yours. Thanks.
Good evening, everyone. I'll start by asking for your forgiveness if some of my comments are provocative. In fact, they are meant to be provocative. So let me start with a couple of observations. Lebanon does not lack plans. In fact, we've had tens of electricity plans over the years, and none of them has been implemented. That's one. That's why I'm very skeptical of talking all the time about plans. With all due respect, we have plans, but we never implement them. Second observation, when it comes more specifically to the green revolution, and unfortunately today, if you go and talk to the average person on the street, they will not understand why this is a priority. All they will understand is that they need electricity and that they are unable to pay for it. And so there is a big learning challenge and convincing challenge to be tackled to be able to make that energetic transition believable and wished for by the citizens of our country. Third observation, and I may disagree with you, Minister, here on something that you said. There are things that made sense in Lebanon that did not get implemented. Lots of things that made sense that did not get implemented. We sometimes defy logic because of political considerations. So my hope is that as we move towards this energetic transition, which is frankly not a choice, nous n'avons pas le choix, it's something that we're going to have to do, is to at least, among the various proponents of different plans, and there are many today in Lebanon, to try to agree on the design principles of this plan, and everything else will come very logically out of it. In French, they would call it la fonction objective. Quelle est la fonction objective du plan énergie? So the design principles, we've touched on some of them. One is that it needs to be least cost. Our citizens cannot afford to pay a big energy bill. A second one, it has to be least polluting. Our country is sufficiently polluted that we cannot continue or amplify the process. The third one, which we ought to think about, particularly after the catastrophe of the port, is the principle of precaution, i.e., the state should not allow for activities to be based in areas where significant damage can be brought on the population. In some countries, by the way, such as France, the principle of precaution has been now enshrined in the constitution, and we ought to take example of some of that. A fourth principle, a design principle for the plan, has to be about decentralization in the hope of unleashing private sector initiatives or local initiatives such as the ones coming from the municipalities. That is an important one. A fifth one has got to be to minimize foreign currency outflows. So yes, for instance, we've heard recently of a plan to immediately try to build a mega power plant. Okay, fine. But the bill in fossil fuel, who's going to pay for that for the next 20 or 30 years? And we've seen some of the numbers in your presentation, Ronnie. So Lebanon cannot afford to continue this outflow of foreign currency, of hard currency, forever. This is something that we need to work significantly on minimizing. And then you could go on and on with a couple of other design principles around regulation, around unbundling, and so on. But I think the debate, Alain, has got to be around the design principles, to agree on those. And once we agree on those, I think the plan will come very naturally out of these design principles. But to me, the issue, again, is not about coming up with a plan. You put in a room 10 reasonable people, they will come up with a good plan. That is not the issue in Lebanon. The issue is around implementation. So let me start with 2 or 3 observations. We as a country, unfortunately, have a governance problem. I mean, it's no secret that the operating system of the country just does not work. Lebanon has become, in French, they would call it une vetocratie. Everybody can say no, nobody can say yes. Nothing gets done. And we've seen it not only in the energy sector, but in many, many other sectors. So that's one thing that we've got to keep in mind, particularly donor institutions and donor countries have to keep in mind that the system does not work. Anybody, you're going to present the best plan to a political leader today, they will cherry pick what they like and throw out what they don't like. You go to the next one, they will cherry pick again, something different, and throw something else. And if that's the road that we're going to take to define a plan, we're never going to get, we're not going to get there. So we do have an operating system or a governance issue when it comes to political decision-making. We have an issue in transparency. How are the decisions being made? Again, if you go back to some examples, in the past, we've been told that 10 years ago or 12 years ago, a country has offered to finance a mega power plant or to build one, and yet these were refused. Is that true or not? Surely we have the compte rendu or procès-verbaux or minutes of meeting from these country-to-country discussions. Where are they being shared with the public? So transparency is an issue. go to another point, competences. Do we have today in the sector, with all due respect, the competences needed and the breadth and depth of competences needed to shepherd the sector towards this energetic transition? Okay? It is no secret that the sector has seen a brain drain over the years. It has seen a brain drain over the last 2 years, particularly, with people's salaries having been decimated. How are we going to attract to the sector the people needed to accompany this challenge? And frankly, if we're only going to rely on, at the management level, on those who have brought us to this point, I've been working all my life in the private sector. I've never seen a team that has not performed or that has failed being tasked with effecting the change and improving performance. I've never seen that in any company. Okay, and so the question is, how do you solve this logjam? And this is where I think I'm going to get a bit provocative. I think at this stage, my recommendation to donor institutions, donor countries such as the World Bank and others, I know it's not easy to say, should be to come up with the best plan that they can based on those design principles. There have been numerous studies. The World Bank, for instance, has tasked EDF over the last couple of years to come up with numerous versions of the studies. This one can be improved upon probably, and so on. But my advice would be for the donor lead institution to come up with the best plan and come up to the Lebanese leaders and tell them, this is the plan that we are willing to finance. There is a saying in French that says, qui donne ordonne. He who pays gets to say what needs to be done. If we are going to be relying on foreign money and foreign aid to salvage our energy sector, well, we would be well advised to take the advice of those who are paying for it. And this brings to the next point, which is who's going to manage all of this? And again, my advice would be for donor institutions and for the Lebanese officials to really think hard about some sort of management contract, to whom I don't know, but really to bring in competencies from around the world alongside Lebanese competences to make that change. Otherwise, we're going to yet be talking of yet another plan, maybe a great plan, but 10, 15, 20 years down the road, nothing will have been done except for some emergency actions, or, as you say in French, le provisoire qui dure. Okay? Sure.
We have time for one question now, and we will take a few other questions later on. Who's first?
Merci. Peut-être que j'anticipe entre les deux panels. J'aurais dû attendre le deuxième panel, mais ma question est adressée à Monsieur le ministre. Je vais commencer par une question générale avant de finir par la question spécifique en 30 secondes, pas plus. Oui. Vous avez dit qu'il y a aujourd'hui, en tout cas, l'État est semi-paralysé. Les institutions gouvernementales ne marchent pas comme il faut. Et les municipalités ont beaucoup plus de responsabilités à assumer que n'importe quel autre temps avant. Donc, vous avez parlé qu'il y a beaucoup de terres, beaucoup de ressources solaires, beaucoup de ressources à en revendre, mais qu'il n'y a pas de stratégie. Quelle est la stratégie aujourd'hui du ministère de l'Énergie et de l'Eau pour accompagner les collectivités locales dans leur transition énergétique? Et, juste une seconde, pardon. Parce que des fois, je me demande s'il y a une stratégie. Et des fois, je me demande إذا دولة ما عم تشتغل ضدهم. يعني بنطلب منهم بليز استثمروا جيبوا لنا طاقة شمسية، بس إذا أنتجوا زي الطاقة الشمسية يا بدهم يعطوا لها EDL يا بدهم يكبوه ما فيهم هن يرجعوا يستثمروا وياخذوا مردود لإلهم. دونك وهذا بينطبق على كل القطاع الخاص. دونك بياخذنا على السؤال الثاني اللي هو شو الشراكة الممكنة بين القطاع الخاص والقطاع العام لنقدر نواكب البلديات بالمرحلة الانتقالية. شكرا.
بس بكلمتين بليز قبل الوزير غجر منه موجود ليمثل وزارة الطاقة. هلا رح أعطيه الكلام بس بليز إذا ممكن تختصر كتير الجواب.
Merci.
I'll compress it as much as possible. Thank you for your question. Listen, any project or any partnership between 2 or 3 parties will only work if it makes sense to all the parties. So whether you talk PPA, PPP, or you talk about government municipality, if the government is selling electricity at 0.5 cents, can you produce it at less than that? It's going to work, whether it's a municipality or a third party with the municipality. Right now, the government, by law, can only sell electricity at 0.5 cents using today's current exchange rate, okay, in the Lebanese pound. Therefore, if you are willing to give me a project, I'm just talking as a normal investor, if you're willing to give me a project, and you sell me the electricity for 0.2 cents, I can guarantee you the government will be the first one to say, well, welcome aboard. Unfortunately, that's not possible. Okay, even with solar in Saudi Arabia, we're talking about 1 cent or 2 cents. So this is twice what we are selling it for, not accounting, losses or whatever. The only way it works if the municipality is allowed to distribute and collect money at a different rate. The government cannot do that by law.
Thank you. Nous allons passer à la deuxième partie parce que nous sommes déjà très en retard. رح أعطي الكلام لحضرة رئيس بلدية العين الأستاذ si vous voulez الأستاذ زكريا بتحب تفضل بس رح نختصر كتير الكلام لأنه صرنا كتير مأخرين إذا ممكن.
مساء الخير للجميع. شكرا للي نظم المؤتمر. بدي أقول على إنه بداية الصيف أحد الأصدقاء بيقول لي زكريا اترك كل شيء واسقي العالم. شو بيعني هذا الكلام؟ إنه كهرباء صفر والناس بلا مي، يعني كل المدخرات أو المدخرات الموجودة بالصندوق لازم أصرفها حق مازوت لحتى الناس تشرب. فإذا شكرا شركة الكهرباء على الهدية اللي هدتنا إياها الأولى، وهذا العبء اللي جينا احنا نتحمله بخصوص هذا الموضوع. نحن كبلديات عنا أراضي بنملكها نحن. هالملك هذا لازم نستثمره لصالح العام بموضوع شيء اسمه كهرباء. الكهرباء ما عادت إلى علاقة فقط بالإنارة، دخلت الكهرباء بكل مجالات الحياة الصناعية، الزراعية، التجارية، التعليمية. وهلأ نحن أمام مشكلة بمنطقة البقاع، موضوع التدفئة، حتى الطاقة، حتى الكهرباء بتقدر تدخل بموضوع التدفئة وتساعد الناس. اليوم نحن في مأزق صعب غير طبيعي. دائما عم نقول نحن المشكلة انه نحن في عنا مشكلة. طيب ليش ما بدنا نفتش عن الحل؟ الحل هو الطاقة البديلة. الطاقة البديلة لأنه اتكررت التجربة من الفترة الماضية حول معامل خاصة معمل بعلبك. تكررت التجربة وشفنا لأي نتيجة نحن وصلنا النتيجة اللي فيها صاروا يتحكموا بالبلد هن جماعة المولدات، وبيجوا بيصدروا لائحة إنه بأسعار اللي لازم نحن نتقاضاها أو لازم نحن نجبيها لصالح المولد. يعني نحن صار فإذا كأنه تبقى لنا سلامتكم كمؤسسة كهرباء وما عاد إلى وجود. صاروا أصحابين المولدات هن اللي بدهم يقوموا يديروا شؤون البلد بأسعار فوق العادة، ونحن أمام هذا الانهيار الصعب القاسي. من هون بدي أقول نحن اليوم نظمنا هالمؤتمر أو تنظم هالمؤتمر، وأنا شرف لي كبير إني شاركت لحتى أحكي عن الصرخة الكبيرة اللي مجتمعنا نحن بيعاني منها. نحن ما بقى بدنا نضلنا نقول نحن واقفين هاي بيسمح فيها القانون، لا ما بيسمح فيها القانون. صار بده يفتش إنه نحن كيف بدنا نستمر نحن كبلديات تجمع بلديات 1 2 3 أكثر من 30 بلدية أو 35 بلدية، تعاوننا مع الجمعية اللبنانية للطاقة المتجددة، قلنا له هاي أراضينا اللي موجودة وهاي العقارات اللي هي ملك الجمهورية والملك البلدية، لحتى نحن نعمل دراستنا لهذا الموضوع ونشوف نحن النتيجة لهذه الدراسة نحطها بين يدي المتمول. هالمتمول اللي هو أو البنك الدولي بده يكون أو البنك الأوروبي أو الدولة اللبنانية. الدولة اللبنانية لسوء حظنا الكبير نحن هلأ بظرف صعب وقاسي فوق العادة صار، فإذا بدنا مثل أنا بثني على كلام الأستاذ جو اللي قال إنه الفريق اللي بيعطي مصاري هو بيعطي الأمر. نحن بدنا نقول عطى المصاري، بدنا نحط الحل سوا. نحن كبلدية على استعداد إن نكون نمشي بهذا المسار ونعطي أي أحلى نتيجة. ونحن في عنا تجربة، هلأ بيحكي عنها صديقي، نحن بيحكي صديقي القرية المجاورة لقريتنا مباشرة اللي هن عندهم تجمع للطاقة الشمسية بالضيعة، كيف كانت صيفيتهم، ونحن بالعكس هن تماما كيف كانت صيفيتنا. لذلك نحن بنتمنى من البنك الدولي والبنك الأوروبي ومن دولتنا الكريمة ومن كل الفريق الوطني اليوم نقول لازم نفتش عن الحل، والحل هو الطاقة المتجددة لنحن نروح على حالة الأمان الاجتماعي بالنسبة للطاقة. شكرا لكم.
الرئيس محمد غضبان بلدية جبولي.
مسيكم بالخير. نحكي شوي إيجابية لأنه بشكل أمور كتير بشعة الكل عم يعاني منها بهذه الظروف ببلدنا لبنان. نحن بلدية جبولي اللي من 4 سنين بدأنا بإنشاء الطاقة الشمسية التوجه لها أو الطاقة البديلة، وقدرنا أنجزنا هذا المشروع بمساعدة القطاع الخاص، واليوم عم ننتج حوالي 1 ميجا واط اللي عم نستفاد من الضيعة ككل، منضوي بكل الضيعة، ولا بل عم نعطي لأحياء تاني ببلديات مجاورة اللي هي زبود واللبوة. فينا نقول بهذا المشروع اللي هو فعلا نقطة ضاوية حايط بالكامل من بالعتمة، ويمكن هذا المشروع اللي حط الضيعة على خريطة لبنان، انه بنفتخر بهذا الانجاز اللي انعمل. طريقة إدارة المشروع هو طريقة الدفع المسبق، يعني فاتورة مسبقة الدفع، مثل التليفون التشريجي بنقول بتشرج قبل بوقت بتضوي شهر كامل أو 45 يوم حسب اللي. الكهرباء اللي بتصلنا 220 مش 219 كمان من أول بيت لآخر بيت. هذا بالخلاف عن المولدات وعن كهرباء الدولة حتى اللي أحيانا بتعاني من تذبذب أو لعب بالتوتر، فما بيوصل أحيانا بيحترق غاز بيحترق غسالة على الكهرباء العادية، بينما الكهرباء الطاقة البديلة عم تصلنا فيكس 220 ما فيها لعب، وعم تصلنا نحن حدود 21 ساعة حاليا عم نضوي في ظل أزمة المازوت الموجودة. في 3 ساعات لأنه ما في كلفة قد فيه، بنحاول إنه نهرب من هذا الوضع. لنقنع العالم يعني بنقول سابقا المواطن كان يعتمد على كهرباء الدولة، وفينا بقول لكم بصريح العبارة 90% من الناس اللي كانت تتعامل مع الموضوع بالتعليق، يعني بتدفع فاتورة رمزية اللي هو اشتراك، بينما الباقي سرقة. فنحن بهذا الوضع اللي نحن فيه، يعني هذا الواقع، بالوضع اللي نحن فيه مش بس انه وصلنا الكهرباء، نحن كمان في جزء كبير وبتمنى يؤخذ بعين الاعتبار هو انه المواطن يتعود على مثل ما له له حقوق عليه واجبات، انه يقدر يدفع الفاتوره وبمنيه، يعني بيكون هو ممنوع، مش انه بينما كهرباء الدوله ما بتجي بده يقطع الطريق او بده يستعمل اسلوب ثاني، بالوقت اللي هو ما عم يدفع فاتوره الكهرباء. بينما هون هو عم يدفع فاتوره الكهرباء، عم يدفع فاتوره الاشتراك قبل بشهر، وممنون انه اذا عم تجي الكهرباء. بيبقى بالنسبه للتسعيره اللي نحن عم تتسعر هي ارخص من كل فواتير المولدات والاشتراكات وبارقام، يعني مش انه ب 50% او 40%، تقريبا اوفر ب5 مرات من كهرباء المولدات. فلنقنع الناس مثل ما حدا من الشباب كان عم يقول انه نقنع المواطنين انه يروحوا على الطاقه البديله، هيدي المشروع هو اقناعه منه فيه مثل ما بيقولوا، ما في حاجه لتعب بهذا الموضوع. نرجع نحن بنتوجه بالشكر لمسيو بفاني، وبنتوجه بالشكر لمسيو روني على استضافتهم لنا، ونعلن الصرخه لحتى السلبيات فينا نحكي للصبح، وبتصور الهموم اللي عم نعانيها كل العالم عم تعانيها بكل لبنان.
بس قول لهم عفوا مش قال فاتوره الكهرباء قيمتها هذا الشهر 10 امبير 600,000 تحت 3 مليون. قالوا كنت انا منتظر خينا دكتور محمد يبلغكم هيدي النقطه على المقارنه حول سعر الفاتوره للشهر. هيدا ال 10 امبير 10 امبير كلفتها 3 ملايين ليره على المولد الكهربائي، 600,000 ليره على الطاقه الشمسيه لهذا الشهر.
شكرا كثير لكم، يعطيكم العافيه. ورح ننتقل دغري للشق الثالث. Nous allons passer à la troisième partie et dernière partie de notre événement, au cours de laquelle nous allons écouter donc nos partenaires exposer leur point de vue après avoir été appelés en fait à imposer leur point de vue. Donc à vous de voir. Je cherche le représentant de la BERD, je ne sais pas, le directeur de la BERD, en fait, je ne sais pas s'il nous a rejoint ou s'il n'a pas pu. De toute façon, je vais laisser la parole à son Excellence, Monsieur l'Ambassadeur.
Merci beaucoup. شكرا جزيلا. أول شيء للبلديات، عشت البلديات وإن شاء الله حزور البلديات ورؤساء البلدية اللي كانوا هون هلا. I will switch to English and I'll take off this. And I have prepared a speech, so okay. I guess maybe I shall stand there or So thank you, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished colleagues. We gather today to discuss a critical sector that serves as the backbone for economic development in any country around the world, which is the energy sector. Looking at Lebanon today, we unfortunately see the economic collapse moving fast, along with very harsh shortage of all energy sources. What we are going through serves to highlight the significance of the energy sector to decision makers, political parties, and most importantly, to the citizens. I hope that national stakeholders are now aware that energy deficiencies are a main hurdle to ensuring functional systems, whether they are financial, industrial, academic, related to transportation, telecommunication, or everything else that affects our daily life. In this crucial, critical phase Lebanon is going through, the government needs to put in place a plan for economic recovery along with a set of needed reforms. The energy sector is at the center of both. Moreover, the IMF and the international partners of Lebanon unanimously agree that priority should be given to the energy sector in all plans and programs. In line with the global trend in energy transition, aiming at reducing greenhouse gases to mitigate climate change impacts, Lebanon indeed, as the title of this session suggests, has various energy prospects. Striking a sustainable energy mix is key. The design of this mix needs to take into account environmental, economic, social, and governance factors. This energy mix needs to rely on renewable energy sources to the maximum extent possible and tap on natural gas as the main fuel for the transition. In my view, reaching this objective requires working on three main pillars, namely setting a clear vision and strategy, building a comprehensive legal and institutional framework, and a strong governance structure, where, of course, the question is this possible to achieve in Lebanon? Can lessons be extrapolated from the experiences we witnessed in the last years? As you know, Norway has been directly engaged in developing one prospect of the Lebanese energy sector, which is the oil and gas sector through the Oil for Development program. Various Norwegian institutions has provided technical support to the Lebanese counterparts since 2007 to date. And I was happy to be here when we started this. This assistance has contributed to the establishment of the Lebanese Petroleum Administration, LPA, and strengthening the capacities of the Ministries of Finance and Environment, among other national institutions, as well as civil society organizations. The program resulted in putting in place a robust legal framework with a complete set of approved laws and application decrees. Moreover, Lebanon managed to implement international best practices for transparency in this sector that was culminated by the ratification of Law 184, enhancement of transparency in the petroleum sector. This experience is well recognized by international organizations and oil and gas companies. On the other hand, the overall governance issues in the country and the political deadlocks during several periods in the last years, coupled with the COVID-19 pandemic and the port explosion, has resulted in delaying the actual progress in exploration activities. I believe we can build on this experience by expanding it to the energy sector as a whole, starting with developing an integrated energy strategy that accounts for energy transition, a strategy that makes use of Lebanon's potential solar, wind, hydro, and natural gas resources. Implementing this strategy requires developing national capacities, particularly now that we are witnessing a serious drain of human resources in both the public and private sectors. In fact, the LPA has lost 40% of its original staff. Financial resources to implement the energy strategy can be mobilized through diverse mechanisms and in partnership with international financing institutions and the private sector. However, a prerequisite shall be the endorsement of an economic recovery plan along with implementing the much-needed reforms at all levels. And as we all know, the political will remains the key success factor to achieve that. In Norway, climate and environment is now first on our government's political platform. And we are looking into fields of cooperation with Lebanon on environment. Norway has taken major steps in climate and energy policies to speed up the transition towards a low-emissions society and help keep global warming below 1.5 degrees, including by launching bold new strategies and projects for hydrogen as well as carbon capture and storage. We are moving towards zero emissions road transport, 80% of new registered cars in Norway are electric. Our shipyards have built the world's first electric ferry and the world's first electric fishing vessel. Our ship owners have taken on to order nothing but zero-emission ships starting in 2030. We will reduce emissions from domestic shipping and fisheries by half by 2030. As announced by our Prime Minister in Glasgow last month, Norway will double its climate financing for developing countries over the next 5 years. Our main contribution to the just transition in developing countries will be to facilitate increased investments in renewable energy and to transfer our own experiences in undergoing the transition. To that effect, Norway will establish a climate investment fund and guarantee mechanisms to mobilize investments in renewable energy in developing countries on a large scale and far more quickly than would otherwise have been the case. We have yet to identify whether these initiatives could benefit Lebanon. Of course, it's not considered a developing country as such. We build on decades of close collaboration between Norwegian government, research institutions, and industry, including many world-leading companies. Drawing on this experience, we stand ready to support an integrated energy strategy in Lebanon. A successful energy transition, as part of this strategy, requires a holistic approach, which includes tax incentives and other policies to promote electric and low-emission solutions. In the area of taxation, we also have expertise to offer, and discussions are ongoing between our two countries' tax administrations. The energy crisis, together with all the other crises in Lebanon today, can only be solved from within. Knowing the Lebanese talents and their persistence, I am confident that if joint efforts are put together, Lebanon and its energy sector can thrive for the benefit of the economy, the environment, and the people of Lebanon. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ambassador. D'abord, ça a toujours été un très grand plaisir de collaborer avec la Norvège, avec ses équipes qui étaient absolument remarquables. Et puis, je note quand même au passage que la Norvège est passée au rang de 5e donateur au Liban. Je laisse tout de suite la parole à François de Ricolfi, que vous connaissez tous, qui est quand même très impliqué dans notre pays, chef du service économique régional de la France. À toi, François.
Merci Alain, ça marche. Et merci à la Fondation Konrad-Adenauer, merci aux organisateurs, merci à Ronnie Karam, dont j'ai bien aimé la présentation. Alors c'est vrai que on dit tout le temps que le Liban est à un moment pivot de son existence. Je pense que c'est encore plus vrai aujourd'hui qu'avant. C'est vrai aussi pour le secteur électrique. Donc je ne suis pas un technicien d'électricité, donc je ne vais pas faire de la concurrence sur ce terrain-là, mais peut-être resituer un peu pourquoi, d'un point de vue, le moment est vraiment là. Et d'abord, qu'est-ce qui se passait avant et où est-ce qu'on est aujourd'hui? Avant, il y avait un système qui, on peut dire, était, comme dire les économistes, un optimum de second rang. C'est-à-dire que c'est un mauvais système, mais qui, d'une certaine manière, marchait. On avait EDL qui fournissait du courant, très peu cher pour les consommateurs, bon, très cher pour l'État libanais, avec une certaine pollution. Et on avait un système de générateurs qui fournissait le complément, avec, pareil, un coût, disons, raisonnable pour les consommateurs, ne serait-ce que parce que c'était un appoint. Bon, c'était toujours quelque chose d'extrêmement polluant. Mais d'une certaine manière, le système fonctionnait. Je me souviens, quand je suis arrivé, j'ai récupéré une jolie application qui m'expliquait gentiment quand le courant serait coupé à Beyrouth. Je savais que de 3 à 6, ça serait le générateur, et ainsi de suite. Donc, ce n'était pas un système parfait, et c'était un système qui marchait. C'était aussi un système sans énergie renouvelable, et c'est un système qui attendait l'application d'un plan. Alors le plan, 10, 20, 15 ans, il y avait un plan, il n'était jamais exécuté. C'est aussi un système qui, de façon assez paradoxale, a une vertu sociale parce qu'il crée de l'emploi. Le monde des générateurs crée de l'emploi. Je ne sais pas, mais je dirais que facilement, il y a 50 ou 70 000 personnes que ce petit monde d'emploi, ceci sans compter les rentes que ça a générées pour différents clans et communautés. Bon, je m'excuse, je parle assez librement, mais je pense que c'est l'occasion. Alors ce système, aujourd'hui, est complètement cassé. On le voit dans la vie de tous les jours. Et pourquoi il est cassé? Parce que d'abord, il est toujours aussi cher pour l'État libanais, ça c'est clair. Et il ne rend plus du tout le service nécessaire. L'EDL ne produit pratiquement plus d'électricité, on le voit. Et pour le coup, les générateurs ont pris le relais, donc en générant encore plus de pollution. On va voir les petits graphiques. Mais surtout, ce qui s'est passé, ce qui déséquilibre complètement le système, c'est qu'avec la dévaluation de la livre et l'augmentation des prix des carburants, les générateurs sont devenus un luxe pour la plupart des Libanais. La facture qui pouvait faire peut-être quelques dizaines de dollars avec une livre à 1507, maintenant est hors de portée. On peut avoir dans certains cas une facture qui va représenter l'équivalent d'un salaire minimum, donc c'est quelque chose qui ne peut pas fonctionner. Donc le système est complètement cassé et le temps est vraiment là de le changer, parce qu'on n'est plus dans cet équilibre un peu instable qu'il y avait avant, on est en déséquilibre. Alors qu'est-ce qu'on fait? Les objectifs, on le sait, faire de l'énergie moins chère, plus propre, moins polluante, plus efficace. Ça, les objectifs, il n'y a pas de problème, tout le monde est d'accord. On connaît les obstacles. On ne va pas revenir là-dessus indéfiniment. C'est les habitudes historiques, les pesanteurs. On en a en France aussi. En France, si vous lisez le journal français, vous voyez que faire une éolienne, c'est pas toujours facile. Il y a toujours des gens qui expliqueront que c'est mauvais pour la santé, que ça fait du bruit, etc. Que c'est cher. Une candidate à l'élection présidentielle, d'ailleurs, explique que ce ne sont pas les énergies renouvelables, ce sont les énergies intermittentes. Bon, si en France, on a des pesanteurs historiques, on aime bien les centrales nucléaires, on aime bien les grands barrages. Au Liban, il y a des intérêts acquis assez évidents, je ne fais pas un dessin. Il y a des pesanteurs politiques. Et aujourd'hui, il y a un manque énorme de ressources, à la fois financières et à la fois de capacités techniques. On en a parlé, je ne reviens pas là-dessus. Alors en même temps, il y a une opportunité. Les premières opportunités, elles sont techniques, on en a un peu parlé. Les énergies renouvelables maintenant sont beaucoup moins chères qu'avant. Elles sont beaucoup plus faciles à connecter au réseau. Les réseaux sont devenus beaucoup plus intelligents qu'avant. Et surtout, elles apportent ce qui manque, elles apportent de la flexibilité à deux points de vue, c'est-à-dire de la flexibilité en termes de gestion, c'est-à-dire qu'on peut être beaucoup plus modulaire qu'avant, et de la flexibilité en termes d'équipement. Au lieu de décorer, si on peut dire, un pays avec d'énormes unités de production, on peut être très modulaire, du plus petit au plus gros. Et dans un pays où il y a une grosse tête, Beyrouth, et ensuite une collection de petites entités géographiques, ça peut être un atout d'avoir cette modularité. Donc ça, c'est quelque chose de très intéressant et qui facilite les choses. On n'est plus dans le ticket forcément 600 millions de dollars, on peut être sur des choses beaucoup plus petites. Deuxièmement, en termes de contexte, le créneau est favorable. Alors paradoxalement, le fait que les infrastructures libanaises sont vieilles, c'est un avantage, parce qu'on sait que sur un échelon de 10-15 ans, c'est la totalité de l'infrastructure qui sera obsolète. Une partie l'est déjà aujourd'hui, on a parlé de Zouk et de Gillet, c'est des unités hors d'âge à tout point de vue, et puis c'est des unités hors technique. Dans 15-20 ans, peut-être que des ramards existants et que Zaran existants seront également hors d'âge. Donc d'une certaine manière, c'est comme une très 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 vieille maison, il faut la rénover entièrement. Et ça ne veut pas dire qu'on la démolit tout de suite, mais ça veut dire que le moment est assez favorable. Et ça veut dire aussi qu'on a du temps. On n'est pas forcé de tout faire en 2 ans. On a une base et on peut ensuite développer lentement. Mais disons, le créneau est favorable. Et puis on a aussi ce système qui est extrêmement polluant et qui est extrêmement cher. C'est un peu dommage de dépenser de l'argent. On a également un réseau qui est très très vieux, qui est en mauvais état et qui est piraté de partout, comme on dit gentiment, les pertes non techniques. Alors on nous dit 35, on nous dit 37, on nous dit 30%. De toute façon, c'est absolument monstrueux. Ça veut dire que chaque fois que DL produit 1 kW, Il y en a déjà une partie non nulle qui est perdue pour des raisons techniques, et puis une autre partie non nulle qui est perdue pour des raisons de gestion. Et ça, c'est quand même extrêmement dommage, et ça craint pour le système. Donc voilà un peu le contexte qui rend tout ceci un peu plus favorable. Qu'est-ce qu'il faut pour que ça marche? Parce que c'est facile, on a vu les plans, qu'est-ce qu'il faut pour que ça marche? La première chose, c'est qu'il faut une volonté politique. Ça, ni moi, ni notre collègue norvégien, ni personne ne peut le fournir à la place des Libanais. On est un contexte, après il faut une volonté politique de changer. Deuxième chose, il faut un cadre juridique. Ça se trouve, il y a plein de modèles sur Terre, il y a plein de gens qui peuvent aider. La Banque mondiale a beaucoup aidé. Ça ne se limite pas à créer une autorité de régulation. Il y a tout un système autour, tout un écosystème à créer. Ça n'est pas si compliqué que ça, parce qu'il y a plein de pays où ça s'est fait. Donc ça peut se faire. Ensuite, il y a un sujet de capacité technique et administrative. Bon, là également, on peut aider. La Norvège a cité l'exemple de son soutien à la LPA, qui est une chose qui marche assez bien. Je pense qu'il y a plein de bonnes fées autour du berceau qui peuvent aider les administrations libanaises à avoir les capacités nécessaires, que ce soit de façon générale ou sur des projets. Alors, dernière condition, on a parlé financement. Quand il y a des projets intéressants, il y a toujours des financements. Le monde moderne croule sous l'argent. Il y a énormément d'argent qui est parqué dans les banques à 0% d'intérêt et qui cherche du rendement, qui cherche de l'investissement. Donc l'argent, je ne suis pas inquiet. Il viendra au Liban. Il viendra au Liban. Il y a une condition préalable, c'est que le Liban redevienne un pays intégré financièrement au monde. Aujourd'hui, le régime de change, je ne parle pas des questions de dette ou des questions politiques, je parle qu'aujourd'hui, le régime de change du Liban est cassé, là aussi. Je suis un investisseur, je ne sais pas si je peux venir faire de l'argent au Liban, je ne sais pas bien sûr si je pourrais le faire sortir, je ne sais pas à quel cours il va entrer, et je ne sais pas à quel cours il va sortir. Donc il faut être très très courageux pour mettre de l'argent au Liban. Donc un prérequis simple, c'est que déjà les règles du jeu soient rétablies au Liban, qu'il y ait un régime d'échange qui fonctionne. Ce n'est pas une question de niveau de valeur de la monnaie, est-ce que c'est 1000, 2000, 10 000, c'est pas grave. C'est une question de règles du jeu. Donc ça, c'est un prérequis fondamental. C'est à partir de là que le reste viendra. Le deuxième prérequis sera bien sûr que le Liban sorte de son état de défaut, se remette à payer ses dettes. Ça, c'est un deuxième sujet. Mais le premier, peut-être plus essentiel, parce que c'est la règle du jeu. Il n'y a plus de règle du jeu, donc on ne peut pas travailler. Et là, on en revient au sujet FMI. Le FMI, ça n'est pas la sorcière qui vient vous taper dessus. C'est les gens qui viennent vous aider à sortir de là où vous êtes et qui viennent, entre autres, vous aider à rétablir un cadre financier qui fonctionne. Donc, vous entendez souvent les autorités françaises répéter sur tous les tons « il faut que le Liban conclue un accord avec le FMI ». Ça n'est pas une religion, il y en a suffisamment au Liban. C'est un truc très pratique pour que l'économie du pays reparte. Donc on le répétera jusqu'à temps que ça fonctionne. Ça peut fonctionner tout seul. Pareil, le Liban peut se faire aider par le FMI parce que le FMI a sa boîte à outils ou sa boîte à bricolage avec tout ce qu'il faut pour refaire un système de change adapté. Donc aucune des quatre conditions que je vous ai décrites n'est incontournable ou n'est très difficile. Chacune des quatre renvoie à la capacité du système politique libanais à prendre des décisions. Là, pareil, ça c'est un peu en dehors de mes modestes compétences, mais c'est le point fondamental. Mais je répète ce que j'ai dit. Vous aviez un système qui, pendant 10 ans, grosso modo, rendait un mauvais service néerlandais. Ce service n'est plus du tout rendu. Donc l'occasion, c'est à la fois nécessaire et c'est opportun de remettre le tableau à plat, peut-être de déchirer les vieux plans et de repartir de nouveau. On a parlé de l'étude d'EDF, il y en aura peut-être d'autres. Mais comme disait un homme célèbre, du passé faisons table rase, c'est peut-être l'occasion. J'en arrête là.
Merci beaucoup, François. Vous vouliez entendre parler de gouvernance, c'est fait. Voilà. Et puis, effectivement, cette histoire de cours de change qui dure depuis 2 ans, il n'y a pas de doute que c'est un très gros plomb pour l'économie. Alessia, you are the Deputy Head of Cooperation at the EU delegation in Lebanon. The floor is yours.
Many thanks, Alain. Good evening, everybody. I'm really glad to be here on behalf of the EU, and I have to say on behalf of the female gender. I'm not so glad to be the only woman to be speaking at this event, but sorry, I had to point this out. So, you know, the EU has a number of objectives. Gender equality is one of them, but we have others. And actually, since the new commission took office 2 years ago, exactly 2 years ago, we launched something called the Green Deal. So the Green Deal is a great invention on our side that has a number of pillars, a number of targets. The main one, I would say, is the fact that we aim to decarbonize the EU by 2050, meaning that net greenhouse emissions will go to zero. And then we have the intermediate target, which is for 2030, to cut emissions by 50%. So the Green Deal has a number of other objectives. They span through from protection of the environment, wastewater treatment, depolluting our sewage system, and so on and so forth. But of course, this event is about energy, so we'll focus on that. The Green Deal of the EU has also an external dimension. So we are trying and we are planning to also convince countries, especially in the neighborhood, what we call the neighborhood, well, the countries that basically surround us, to also cut their emissions, cut their pollution, because we have, brutally speaking, a very direct interest in that. If we talk about wastewater, which is one of the sectors that we work on a lot in Lebanon, if the waste goes to the Mediterranean, it will get to our shores. And same goes with the emissions, because at some point they will get to us, and we know what greenhouse gas does to the planet, not just to the countries where it's produced. On top of this Green Deal that was launched 2 years ago, this year, at the beginning of 2021, we launched a renewed partnership with the southern neighborhood, which is the Mediterranean, basically the Middle East and Northern African region, which has, of course, as one of its main pillars, the transition to a green economy. When it comes to funding, we are planning to increase the funding to the region overall by 25%, and especially 1/4 of our funding will have to be earmarked for green initiatives. So this is the background on kind of domestic policy and regional policy. Now, when it comes to Lebanon, I have to say I arrived only 3 months and 1 day ago to Beirut, but it's been enough, I would say, to see how challenging and also how many opportunities there are in the country. So intellectually speaking, it's very interesting, it's very stimulating, but of course we need to do something about the situation. So from the European Union, we are working actually on programming for the next years, and when it comes to the Green Deal or green sector, we are going to focus on a number of initiatives that don't necessarily have something to do with expanding the supply of energy or infrastructural investments, but rather on the demand side. Someone earlier said that there was an elephant in the room, which was governance, and we agree. I would say that the other elephant in the room is savings, energy savings and efficiency, but I will talk more about that later on. So when it comes to governance, I'll take a step back. We used to have big investments, big infrastructural investments, expanding the grid, building new plants. All this, of course, can be done. We can build a very nice cathedral that then will not be used, will not be operational, or we can find ourselves in a situation like today where basically the supply is not enough and we have 2-3 hours of electricity per day. So from our point of view, for the time being, we don't plan to invest more, but we think that the precondition for anything to happen in the country is to have reforms. We've heard a lot about plans, about creating strategies, plans over plans over plans. There are things in Lebanon that are actually there already, like a law passed in 2002 on the energy sector that was never implemented. That's something that could and should be done, in our opinion. The colleague from the French embassy also mentioned, well, the prospects for an IMF program. Personally, as an economist, I tend to, how can I say, be wary of illusions. So we should avoid thinking that the IMF will save Lebanon by itself. An IMF plan has to be implemented by the Lebanese. So all this package of reforms is the first and the foremost precondition for anything to happen, anything to improve throughout the economy, but especially in the energy, which is such a, let's say, money-eating sector and a basic service for the population. Someone also said, qui donne ordonne. Earlier, for sure, we donors are very much engaged in policy dialogue with the authorities, but there must be the willingness, the impulse from the authorities. We cannot replace. We don't want to replace the Lebanese authorities. Why should we? We cannot. I mean, the country needs to take ownership for whatever initiative is done to improve the life of citizens. Now, I'll go towards what I mentioned earlier about energy efficiency versus supply. So we've heard a lot of descriptions of the sector, of plans to increase supply, to build more infrastructure, basically to expand the availability of energy. I'll go back to the Green Deal because, and I guess most of you are aware of what's happening in Europe. What happens in Europe is that, of course, we have a stable supply of energy, so we don't have that issue. We don't have to secure the supply. But what our regulators and our governments, and I mean, I will bring the Italian experience because I'm Italian and I see what's happening there, is to focus really on savings. There is not really a culture of energy efficiency in Lebanon, unfortunately. I can recognize that it's also linked to social dynamics. But why shouldn't it be there? Why should we not focus on that? Our projects, the projects that the European Union is financing currently and where we plan to invest in the near future, focus on that. So, for instance, on refitting of buildings, public buildings, also industrial factories, on also increasing awareness of how much basically we consume, and how important it is really to reduce our consumption. We have seen, I mean, we've noticed since the weather changed that there was less demand for air conditioning, how actually it seemed that there was a slight higher availability of electricity supply. So that's something that we're really going to invest in the near future. And that goes also hand in hand with the reforms. Why? Because it's true that we have a serious governance issue. Nobody can deny that. But there is also an issue with the perception from the population of what energy is, what electricity supply is, what public services are. You know, in Europe, fuel, gasoline is not subsidized. It's actually taxed because it's a kind of a liability. I mean, it's got economic costs, which of course importers have to buy the fuel. It has environmental costs. So, you know, taking your car and polluting has a cost on public health, on environment, and so on and so forth. And this indeed goes hand in hand with establishing a fair system of tariffs, in ensuring their collection, and therefore making the system sustainable, self-sustainable. Before I conclude, I would like to end on a hopeful note. Again, I said I'm Italian. Italy is a very similar country to Lebanon, I have to say. I really feel at home here. We managed to have a functioning energy system, and if we did it, Lebanon can do it too, I believe. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much for the positive note. I was a bit worried when you said 3 months and 1 day. I thought you were already counting the days. But thank you very much for what you said. One of the nicest moments that I had a few years ago was the successful bid of Lebanon for EBRD, to join EBRD. And I'm very happy that you are with us, Khalil. You are the director for EBRD in Lebanon, and the floor is yours.
Merci Alain, merci beaucoup pour l'invitation, merci à la Fondation. Bonsoir, I'll continue in English. Actually, Alessia said 3 months and 1 day. I'm here since 3 months and probably 3 days. So, and yes, I joined the country recently. I joined EBRD much longer ago. But EBRD, in a few words before I start into our topic, is rather the new kid on the block in the country. We've been here only for 4 years. And we have been here with a very big ambition for Lebanon. And very frankly speaking, our strategic goal, our #1 goal, was the renewable sector. And I'm using the past here, unfortunately, because it was the case in the beginning, and we started massively investing in the country. We invested 750 million euros in a very short period of time, and then the economic collapse happened, and we unfortunately had to stop. And since this economic collapse, we are not investing anymore. However, we are still committed to the country, very much committed to the country, and renewable energy remains our #1 objective in the country. We have very strong targets, and we believe that the potential is really very important. I would like just to come back to some of the topics that have been raised in the beginning of this event, and I think it was Joe who said that we need, as international financial institutions, to impose a plan to a country. Unfortunately, it doesn't work like that. For instance, and Alain just mentioned this, Lebanon is a shareholder of the EBRD. The international financial institutions are owned by the countries, and we cannot operate in a country without the country being a shareholder of the EBRD. And this is a very important point. And this is the core of a mandate of an institution like the EBRD. So we are in a consensual approach, and we need to work with the authorities in order to be able to progress. We are a bank, but we are a bank different from a commercial bank. We invest that equity, but we do a lot of what we call policy dialogue. And this policy dialogue is key in our approach. So for us to be as impactful as possible, we need to discuss with the authorities, and we need to come to consensus. And here, I think the most important part today for the country, and I think everyone said it already, is the effort on reforms that the country needs to implement. François described it very well in French. I won't be able to do it better in English. Today, we need a very strong push on reform. It's not a matter of an IMF as such. It's a matter of what the IMF will bring on key structural reforms. And this is very important for a bank like EBRD to be able to come back to the country and to reinvest. So it's a little bit sad to say that today we are not investing anymore, but I have been appointed recently. We have a strong team on the ground, and the idea is to continue this commitment. So we are very, very hopeful that very strong commitments from the Lebanese authorities can be done towards a plan, whether IMF or standalone reforms, but this is really very important. You know, we are now speaking about purchasing gas from Egypt, electricity from Jordan. These are emergency tackles, and I think Ronnie also mentioned the fact that we are really in an emergency mode. But this should not deviate the core objective of working on reforms. Working on reforms in order to be able to attract back the investors, because actually the EBRD will be there mainly to support the investments of the private sector. We're not like other sister financial institutions who will be providing financing to governments. We are willing rather to put our focus on the private sector and to support the investment of the private sector. And with this policy effort that we are trying to do in the country, the idea is for us is to improve the business environment in order for these private investors to be attracted by investments in Lebanon. So what are we doing if we are not investing and financing and we are a bank? What we're doing is mainly trying to prepare the ground for these future investment and financings. And because renewable energy is our #1 objective for the country, we are trying to support mainly the authorities, whether the ministry or LCEC or other bodies in Lebanon to improve the framework of the energy and mainly of the renewable energy. We have been working mainly on a number of topics. We were preparing the PPAs, and this has also been mentioned in the beginning, for the first tender in Akkar. And now we are also supporting the authorities in preparing the second round, hopefully whether in wind or solar plus storage. And this is done through consultants. This is mainly financed by donors and also sometimes and very often in Lebanon by the EU. So this is also important to highlight. So we try to continue this effort in order to be able to come back on the financing side. And this is really, again, very important. There is one topic that we have been trying to push recently, which is the distributed renewable energy law. We have worked together with consultants on a new draft law that we have handed in to the minister recently, and this is, I think, something that can be a game changer in the current circumstances. You know that today the legal framework for the small-scale renewable energy is not very stable, I would say, and what we are trying to do together with the ministry, with LCEC, with EDL, is to try to draft on an advanced legal framework for various distributed renewable energy application, whether the net metering or the peer-to-peer trading or the power wheeling. And we hope that something like this is a tiny step, but if this law can pass and go through Parliament and be adopted, this can be a good contribution, at least in the short term, for the renewable energy in the country. Furthermore, we extended recently, again, this work through consultants, their mandate to structure what we call a credit enhancement mechanism. Today, if renewable energy projects were to be launched in the country, given the default on the sovereign, investors will be looking for enhanced credit and guarantees. And here, again, in collaboration with the ministry, with LCEC, with EDL, with other international financial institutions like the World Bank, we are trying to put in place a mechanism by which, after this, I would say, stabilization of the macro, investors can come back to the country, invest in renewable energy without directly relying on the sovereign guarantee, which will be probably an enhancement and an improvement of the overall, I would say, environment for their investment. So, in a nutshell, EBRD has, again, great ambitions in the renewable energy sector. We want to make sure that everyone is aligned and, again, that the authorities can put in place the needed reform in order to attract the investors, because we believe in the potential of the renewable energy in this country, whether because of the weather, because of the price, because it's green, and this is the core or the directions that the organization like EBRD has today. So a strong patience, but also a commitment for a better future.
Merci beaucoup Khalil. Ronnie, en 2 mots s'il te plaît, après beaucoup de soutien hein, et après beaucoup d'interventions très intéressantes, une question qui nous vient de Zoom. Is there any educational component within this project so our new generation become fighters for such projects? Et on peut encore prendre 1 ou 2 questions de la salle pour suivre. Pendant ce temps, si tu veux bien nous répondre de manière succincte, s'il te plaît. Monsieur aussi et monsieur avaient des questions.
Just quickly, I mean, in terms of education, the way we look at it is obviously, the outreach that we would have across the public and the relationship that we're creating with the municipalities. So these projects are development projects. They're not only energy projects, and they will create the jobs necessary locally. And including, in the region, for example, in Ras Al Balbak, we're collaborating with the 30 municipalities. We have talked about integrating centre de formation, an education center that would focus on the technicalities of solar and wind, and would form people in that region to be able to work in that field. And this could be exported. We know the Lebanese contractors have been successful in Lebanon, but they moved across the world and mainly in the Middle East. So this is something that would be used locally to be able to build our infrastructure on a large scale, and we would export talents in the future in the region that would allow us to create the opportunities that previous generations had in the Gulf, in the contracting and in different construction projects.
Thank you very much. Une question, monsieur avait une question en haut. Nous avons le temps de prendre un maximum de 3 questions. S'il vous plaît, adressez-les aux panélistes ici présents.
Good evening, Raja Abdullah. Mr. Khalil, I'd like to ask you, you mentioned that EBRD is sponsoring a law for distributed renewable energy. Would that allow Lebanon eventually to come up with projects on a BOT basis? Is that allowed today at all in the legal framework? And would that be allowed under the law that you just mentioned on a BOT basis, where you would finance, install, operate, and eventually transfer while selling the electricity to the end user? Thank you.
On va prendre les 3 questions de suite et puis on laissera la parole aux panélistes.
Merci, mesdames et messieurs, pour vos présentations. Ma question s'adresse au ministre Raja. Monsieur le ministre, premièrement, je félicite votre courage d'être là. Et ma question est, pourquoi n'avons-nous pas d'électricité?
Monsieur.
Good evening. As Mr. François said, the system is broken. Yes, we feel it every day. And it amuses me to no end to hear recent government officials explain to us why we still cannot have electricity. But the question to the audience, to the panel is, with the current system today, for a framework, legal framework for us to solve the problem, it's not going to happen anytime soon until we have a new government. So would you guys consider whether the European Union or the EBRD a system which is de facto what happens today? If you look at the generators today, we're paying 30 cents per hour today, which is 3 times higher than if we bought it at 10 cents, let's say, from solar. So would you be able to support directly today a system which de facto recognizes the reality on the ground, which is today we are paying 30 cents an hour, independently what the legal rate is, which nobody is going to be able to continue at that rate. But the rate today de facto is 30 cents. So why can't we have a system in place to replace all these generators with solar power today at 10 cents an hour? That would generate 1.5 gigawatts within a year and solve the problem with the reality that we have today without trying to reinvent the wheel. Thank you.
Thank you. Last question, and we take the answers from the panel.
It's building on what everyone said. I don't see we're gonna have elections soon, and I don't see any solution in Lebanon soon. And we have to take, building what the ministers just said, we have to take pragmatic action to solve our problems. And based on the technology today of smart grid and microgrid, and having all the generators in Lebanon that can satisfy the capacity needed in power generation in Lebanon, and following the goal of reducing CO2 emission. Today, if we connect all generators together in a smart grid that has a controller system that turns off and on a generator, automatically we will reduce around 30 to 40% of our fuel consumption. And the only way to do it is through a smart grid. And I don't see the government why didn't do it till today.
What is your question, please?
My question is, are you ready? Is the international community ready to finance a public company that is owned by the people of Lebanon and is ready to hook their generators on the grid and implement what we call smart grid technology. And it can be done starting by the industrialist valley in Lebanon and then grow up on a modular way. It's for decentralized energy resources.
Thank you very much. Khalil, would you like to start?
The answer for your question would be quick, because actually BOT is rather for large scale, and this law, distributed renewable energy law, is for the small scale. So it's not really within the scope of this draft law.
Thank you. Alessia, would you like to?
Yeah, thank you. So the first question for the donors was on replacing generators with solar power. So in fact, this is what we've been doing, especially this year. There was a reflection internally on how to respond with our funds, especially our ongoing projects, to the current crisis. And we have indeed redirected some funding to, for instance, in our water and sanitation projects, equipping water pumps with solar panels or other similar, small-scale infrastructure. We have another project that has been going on for some time, which is actually supporting the LAF, the Lebanese, the army, in its own renewable energy strategy, because we have to recognize that the army has its own strategy to reduce fossil fuel consumption. And so in that case as well, we have been installing solar panels on LAF structures. Then, are we ready to do that at a national scale? That needs a lot of money that we don't necessarily have. I mean, we have our own limits as donors as well. Then on the other question, if we're ready as donors to finance a public company that would hook generators to the grid, no, for the simple reason that generators consume fossil fuels, that fossil fuels pollute, that the pollution has very, very negative impacts on our own health, on the environment, and on climate change. So, no.
Thank you very much. Un mot, François.
Juste un point pour rebondir sur ce qu'a dit ma voisine. Il y a un vrai changement de paradigme dans les institutions multilatérales en général, c'est qu'elles ne vont plus financer de carburants fossiles du tout. Et si elles font ça, les investisseurs privés suivront très vite. Donc la fenêtre qui a pu exister pour le Liban pour acheter ou faire des énergies fossiles est en train de se fermer. Et donc c'est une raison de plus pour réfléchir activement à un changement de paradigme où on repose sur des énergies renouvelables. Après, ça serait du 100%, mais on est vraiment dans un changement international de paradigme. Ça, c'est une remarque. L'autre remarque, c'est qu'il faut aussi revenir à la vérité des prix. Je parlais de devises. Après, l'autre exercice, c'est la vérité des prix dans le pays. Pour que les choses aient un vrai prix, ni trop démesuré, ni trop ridicule. Et une des raisons pour laquelle le système ne marche pas, c'est qu'il n'y a plus de vrai prix d'électricité dans le pays depuis 20 ans. Il faut que ça change. S'il n'y a pas de vrai prix, il n'y aura pas de vraie économie.
Merci beaucoup, François. Le mot de la fin, monsieur l'ambassadeur.
Merci beaucoup. S'il vous plaît, en anglais. To the question of governments and the difficulties of governance, we have experienced throughout the years that there maybe was never such a thing as a perfect government in Lebanon. It takes ages to form one, etc. But we have nevertheless a very good experience with cooperation nevertheless, and one of the institutions I spoke about, LPA, was managed to build itself up throughout these years since 2007 without governments, without presidents, so there's hope. There's hope. It's possible to work on what there is, because Lebanon is unfortunately, geographically, placed in a very difficult region. And there are regional things always spilling in, to put it mildly. There are international likewise. So we have to do whatever we can and stand by Lebanon and build its institutions the way we can. And not only the institutions, we support the. We should also support the civil society. I was today in a conference regarding. It was about the. It was a civil society conference that was really amazing to see how many talents there are. And Mario, what was the name of the conference? Exactly. Sorry, I didn't remember it. So okay, there is hope. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sur ce mot d'espoir, nous sommes arrivés à la fin de cet événement. Un grand merci à tous nos intervenants, à tous ceux qui se sont déplacés, à tous ceux qui ont été sur Zoom avec nous, qui ont pris le temps de nous suivre. On a de loin dépassé le temps. Une fois de plus, au nom de la Fondation citoyenne libanaise, je voudrais vous remercier tous. Je voudrais remercier l'École supérieure des affaires. Je voudrais remercier la Fondation Konrad-Adenauer. Et vous êtes tous conviés à un cocktail pour clôturer cette belle soirée. Merci.